Hello and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, a huge guest. You may know him from the band Abandon. You may know him from Drain the Sky. You may know him from John the Baker and the Malnourished. You may know him from Kicker. You may know him from Medication Time. You may know him from Nigel Peppercock. You may know him from Tension Span. Or you may know him from Mindrot. Or you may know him from Cantankerous. Or you probably know him from Dystopia. Matt Mauz Parrillo is on the show today, and this is a good one. Stay tuned for more in 1 second. But first, if you want to get in touch with me, head over to the email address, turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, Tristan Abraham. Thank you, Tristan, for all the hard work you do for the show. This episode is entirely Tristan saying we should get Mauz from Dystopia on the podcast, and then hitting up our good buddy, Scotty Tank Crime, Scotty Karate. Thank you, Scotty. And Scotty made it all happen. And so big thank you to Tristan and Scotty for making this happen for me. And you too, but really this is about me. So thank you guys. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Instagram at @LeftForDamian. There's a Turned Out a Punk Facebook page, a YouTube page, an Instagram page, and a TikTok page. All those can be found at Turned Out a Punk on those platforms. And there are videos that are posted from the shows and other stuff occasionally, and you can find it all there. If you want to support the show, tell all your friends about it. Let them all know that we have this podcast, and sometimes you're listening to it, and there's someone from, like Tiffany's on it, and then sometimes you're listening to it, and Mauz from Dystopia is on it. So if you know someone that fits in that range of music, tell them about this podcast, because they might enjoy it. I also play in a band. We are called Fucked Up. You can find out more information over at fuckedup.cc. We have a brand new 7-inch on Sub Pop Records called Disabuse, and we are playing in Montreal next month as part of Pooza Fest. So come and see us and hang out, and we will talk. We can blaze out some weed. Voivod's playing. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to have a good time if you're in Montreal in a couple weeks. So check out fuckedup.cc for more info on that, and hopefully I'll see you there. All right, on to today's show. As I said off the top, Matt Mauz Parrillo is on the show, and if you are unfamiliar with his work, he's one of my favorite guitar players ever. This guy's like the wizard of the metal zone. He's got an incredible sound, and Dystopia are a band that I feel like have fascinated fans new and old with their just everything about this band. There's just something about this band that has always drawn people to them. People have always been intrigued by them, and it's only grown exponentially in the last few years, where they have become one of the more talked about bands in punk and hardcore. Like crazy. Like we talk about a lot in this episode, so you'll hear us go on a little bit more if you're unfamiliar with the phenomena of Dystopia's ascension in punk rock iconography and music. But I'm not going to ramble on about that now. I'm going to let you listen to this episode. This is an episode that actually took place over the course of 2 conversations, and you'll hear that break when it comes in the episode. That's it. I don't have anything more to ramble on about. Check out tankcrimes.com for all of your Dystopia needs, and check out all of the other bands that Mauz is involved with. Kicker's phenomenal. Cantankerous, you can hear me ramble on about them incessantly in this episode, and Mindrot, and all these other. The guy has been in so many incredible bands. This is a good one. This is one I've wanted to do for a very long time. Really didn't think it was going to ever happen, and so I got to say once again, thank you to Scotty and Tristan for making it happen, and of course, thank you to Mauz. So sit back, relax, enjoy Mauz on Turned Out a Punk. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to hear what you got coming my way right now.
Well, I was excited to talk about Dystopia. I was excited to talk about Mindrot. I was excited to talk about Nigel Peppercock. But I am very, very excited to talk about Cantankerous, a band that I only recently found out through our mutual friend Scotty Karate that you were in. So, oh my gosh, I've got a lot to talk to you about today.
Oh, right on. That's so It's so random to me. I don't know. Just it,
Well, it's funny because I feel like, all three bands there's like a sonic kind of through line in your guitar playing that kind of links them all, but they're kind of disparate sounding bands. And I mean that in specific to Cantankerous, Mindrot, and Dystopia.
yeah. I mean, it was a band that I wasn't the original member of, and I was the youngest guy in the band. And but like I was like best friends with all of them, and it was just they mainly were playing like house parties and or they played they plugged into one of the parties got broken up and they plugged into behind our high school as same night as prom and caused all the shit and so I was always there and I learned a lot from all of them. I'd never been in a band before and I learned just by jamming with the bass player who's like one of my oldest friends.
Well, we're gonna get to that, but I got to start it off the way they all start off, which is Matt. How'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
um I guess like the first was always either seeing like scary stuff on the news as a little kid or going through LA. I remember like driving with my parents like down Hollywood or Sunset Boulevard and seeing like this woman with like bright yellow hair. I was probably like 7 or 8 and I was like just so shocked but also just like scared. And she's waving at everybody and we make eye contact. She's waving at me, and I'm like, "Oh no!" And then like I have a couple older sisters, 10 and 12 years, and one of them had a boyfriend that was like a surfer guy. He came over to our house when I was really young, and it's like a Christmas, and he was late. He's like, "Yeah, sorry, I was late. I got stabbed in the back by punk rockers." And he lifted up his shirt and he's showing my whole family this. And like, yeah, he's from like Woodland Hills. And so I was just like, oh my, really scared of it. And then we moved to Orange County in '84, and then I started I was on the bus and I saw millions of dead cops on the bus, and I was just like, what does that mean? And then some this girl was like, oh, it's a punk band, and it's like, I really got to check this band out, or but I really didn't start getting into it till high school or through skateboarding. A lot of the old like Visions videos, like it had Agent Orange on it, and just like it was always what people were playing at like skate parks or ramps, and then school, and I had like a friend that I shared a locker with, and he was getting out of punk. He was going new romantic, and so but he was like, "Oh yeah, you should check out these records." And he'd either like give them to me or sell them to me, or just some of them he wouldn't part with. But Subhumans, Dead Kennedys, Crucifix, Youth Brigade, and so this is like I don't know freshman year, I think '86 for me. So.
It's interesting you brought up the fear of punk rock, and I feel like, especially in Southern California, from the media I've kind of looked at over the years, like there was like a real palpable fear of punk rock
Mm-hmm.
in mainstream society. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
I've always speculated it's kind of in the wake of like Manson and the Manson murders
Mm-hmm.
and the way that kind of ended for the sort of the hippie movement. And so here's this
Mm-hmm.
new youth movement that's even more confrontational emerging.
Right.
And it just feels like, yeah, like news reports, everything was like, oh my God, what is this menace that's coming to Southern California?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and just like when walked down the street, it was like they were either intimidated or just I mean, it was like, and then especially in Southern California, being around like just there's a lot of like military bases and stuff, and just
Especially like, I guess, to appropriate the vernacular behind the orange curtain, when punk kind of gets there, it's famously talked about how it becomes so
mm-hmm.
much more violent and so much more
Mm-hmm.
extreme. And it's kind of like, I guess, the birth of what is popular hardcore in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
but that is also like, you know, you talk to anyone who's part of that original Max scene, they talk about that like it was the end of the world, like that was the
Hmm.
apocalypse once it got to Orange County.
Yep, yep. And all the jocks became skinheads and etc. Just yeah, and I don't know. Once I got into the, oh, I mean, I met like best friends of my life, you know, and so I mean, I got into it later than a lot of people that I grew up with, so I missed out on a lot of the really big stuff when it was jumping, like at Olympic Auditorium and vendors and this and that, and a lot of my friends went to all those gigs and stuff. But when I was getting into it, it was like a lot. It seemed like it was petered out for a while, and it was, I don't know, all the shows were a lot smaller, and just I don't know. I feel like yeah, I guess I don't know.
It is almost like it dies because it gets so violent. Like people talk about it all
Hmm.
the time when they're on here. Like there's like people like that guy that you met getting into New Romantic. Like people were driven out of the scene, and because of that, like a lot of cool stuff happens, like the Paisley Underground kind of stuff, and sort of the like I guess the Tex punk kind of stuff or the horse punk kind of stuff. Like that's like an emergence, I think, of people kind of fleeing punk and hardcore as it's getting so
Hmm.
violent. But it just seems like it eventually just kills everything off for a while.
Yeah, I mean, all the bands that, like, Youth Brigade became the Brigade, and 7 Seconds like did New Wind, and then like, or the bands like went metal, or just, and or even like Brian Baker was in Junkyard, or just like, I don't know. And I have some friends that love that band, but like it's just,
It's a divisive band, I think. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
I've grown to
yep,
love them over the years, but at the time when I first heard them, I'm like, oh, I can understand why people don't like this.
yep. So it was, I don't know, it was just like a weird time, and there was just so many little like microcosms like happening, but it was just the crowds were smaller, and like all the people were like straight edge kids were going to Crust shows, and metalhead. It just didn't seem so separate as it is now, because there wasn't a whole lot going on. I feel like that's kind of how touring was too. And then I don't know. I just think everyone found it in a different way all at once. Whereas I don't know, like if I'd stumbled on it like 3 years before that, like it would have been totally different. But
Yeah, like Bad Religion's in the unknown, and there's like this
uh-huh.
sort of like moment where, but that's when it gets really interesting again, when it gets smaller. And you see that happen kind of throughout the history of punk and well, I guess hardcore too, but like punk broadly speaking, where these moments of contraction where it's not nearly as popular and all these different bands are forced to intermingle with each other and play together. You get a
Mm-hmm.
lot of cool cross-pollination happening and a lot of sort of
Mm-hmm.
new styles emerging, I think, out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was just trying to think of like back to the original question about like Cantankerous and like where the band was coming from and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. I everything was changing all at once, so we were still trying to be like a hardcore band with kind of political lyrics. Our singer had like wrote really amazing lyrics, and he was kind of like my mentor that got me into punk rock, Jim Barr. And he was like the guy that turned me on to like tape trading, and we went to high school together, and he'd get in trouble for using the photocopy machine to print flyers about apartheid in South Africa, or like, or vegetarianism, or just this and that. And but then the other guys were like like coming from more like Dinosaur Jr. or Sonic Youth, or like the later SST stuff, and then like Blast, or I don't know. That was a band that I saw a lot growing up, and but first show was UTI and Hard Stance in Irvine,
Oh,
and
that's awesome. What a
and
show.
so and all my friends were friends with Hard Stance guys, and so that's how like I mean we weren't straight edge, but there was so much like straight edge hardcore and stuff coming about all at the same time, and so everyone was just going to the shows regardless, and they were always usually good.
There's such a sweet spot in that like late 80s, early 90s period of California hardcore where it's sort of post Youth Crew and
Mm-hmm.
there's like a real groove to things without it getting too funky that people are
Mm-hmm.
kind of finding. And like I guess Inside Out, I find Cantankerous kind of
Mm-hmm.
fits into that too, where it's not like as fast or as sludgy as stuff would obviously get with the stuff you're making later on, but it's got this sort
Mm-hmm.
of like yeah, like post quicksandy or maybe even pre quicksandy kind of groove to it.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think that band was. I think I don't remember when Kickstand started, but
I think it's after you guys. Like I think it's like
okay.
but now I'm fucking up my timeline. So but I think yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you guys would have been or they would have been certainly going beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, we were definitely listening to like, Cro-Mags and like Underdog and Breakdown and I don't know. And then, but that was also the same time where like, youth of today like started Shelter, and then like, those guys were hanging around Orange County a lot. There was a Krishna temple in Long Beach, and like, and yeah, there was just all these different things that were like changing all at once, and then there was also like a really big like peace punk and like crust scene that like probably started 83, 85. But like there's some old bands like Another Destructive System or A Solution, Apocalypse, Glistenmax and stuff, and they were pulling a lot of stuff from England, and like a bunch of those guys like went over there, and those were all friends of ours too, and so they were like bringing a lot of that stuff over, to tape trading and pen pals and stuff, and then just all this stuff is kind of happening all at once, and I don't know, it was a lot of fun for a while, and
We're Apostles Southern California too.
no, Apocalypse.
No, I know Apocalypse definitely,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
was
yeah.
there Apostles? I mean, it's interesting because I was reading that unofficial history of Hardline book that
Yeah,
came out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's Apostles is a British band,
Yeah, and it was
but
talking about the.
but
Sorry, go on.
they did a record on the guy from Vegan Reich's label, and
That's the
because
connection.
yeah, yeah, and I think he did another like ALF benefit comp or something with a bunch of like Crust and European bands and stuff.
And Chumbawamba.
And yes, yep, and yeah, I mean, and all that stuff was like pretty new at that time too. Like we would, my friends were getting like their demo tapes, and then the first LPs and stuff, and then their side projects, and Danbert No Bacon, or and as like I think Culture Shock had just started after the Subhumans broke up, and so this was all stuff that we were like just listening to all at once. And then even like the Melvins, that all that Alchemy record stuff like started coming out, and like when I was 16, it was like RKL and Christ on Parade and Peni were like my favorites. And then like there's this new label in California that's putting out all this other stuff. Like we knew Poison Idea, but we didn't know Neurosis or Melvins or. But I mean that's all happening too. So I think we were just drawing from a bit of all of that, really, and just trying to I think we only played like 7 or 8 gigs, but we did a tour, and we put out a 7 inch, and we did a tour to like Idaho, Salt Lake City, San Francisco, and Vegas, and we like, and this was like when I'm 17, I'm still in high school, and my parents were really cool about it. My mom signed over temporary guardianship to my friend Jim, and we went on the tour for 2 weeks, and it was amazing.
Is
But
that where you guys play with like DRI and Sick of It All?
yes, yes, yeah. There's the video. Did Scotty send you that video or?
No, I found it on my own research. As soon
Oh
as I found
wow.
out you were in Cantankerous, I'm like, oh my God, I got to do a way deeper dive on this band. Because I got one day I was going to my job at a call center and I stopped by this record store and the guy's like, you like Martha and the Muffins? And I'm like, yeah, man, like I like all that kind of stuff, new wave stuff. He's like, okay, I got a box of 7 inches for you to look through. And I like look through this box of 7 inches and it's all like 88 to 90 American hardcore. But like the Project X 7 inch was in there and the first Iconoclast 7 inch. And Six and Stone's first 7 inch. Like it's an incredible box of records, but the one that kind of always eluded me information wise, because this is pre-Discogs, was the Cantankerous
Hmm.
7 inch. So
Hmm.
now being able to put together the pieces as soon as I was like, oh my God, the internet Cantankerous, I got to do that. So yeah, I watched that video a couple times now.
I think that's the only one that exists, and no, I mean, I'm still really good friends with all those guys, and it was a big part of my my youth.
So was there
But
overlap between Cantankerous and Mindrot?
no, we went on that tour, and then me and the bassist left like that summer, and then I hooked up with the Mindrot guys. I was like kind of wanting to, I don't know, I was really starting to get into like early stenchcore stuff like Extreme Noise Terror and Soft Throat, like Bolt Thrower, all the Crust stuff. And then I finally met some other guys that were like starting a band, and one of them was the singer of Confrontation, Matt Fisher, and he was starting a different band with a bunch of other old heads, and but the same thing. Like they had already had the band going. I was the new guy. I was the youngest. I showed up and did it.
Uh, You brought it up earlier, but I find that cultural exchange between like English crust and peace punk in Southern California, and I guess Northern California too, certainly.
Hmm.
I find it so interesting, like how there's like that heavy duty exchange that you mentioned going back to like the early 80s, and there seems
Hmm.
like a lot of influence on bands were coming more for the UK stuff. Like it was interesting. I did Danbert No Bacon was on the podcast, and I he brought up Vegan Reich, and
Hmm.
then I brought up like, oh, that's the ALF compilation that you guys are on, and to him it was just very weird that they would come from kind of the same place, these sort of like
Hmm.
two kind of disparate, seemingly disparate things, but it's interesting how that British peace punk, crust punk stuff gets taken up in different ways once it hits Southern California.
I mean, it seemed like it was also happening. It was like happening in New York and Minneapolis, really a lot around then. And I don't know. There's a lot of people just doing cool stuff. Like even just like, oh, we're gonna have a unity picnic, and just at the end of the day, it's just like a bunch of like dirty punk rockers like drinking at a park. But like at the same time, like everyone's like meeting each other, making friends, and like here's my zine, here's my demo, like and trading, networking, and yeah, it seemed like there was a lot of that happening, but also just I don't know. It's all sorry, I'm a little high right now,
Oh
so
my God, me too. I got my dab rig out. I've been doing tabs. I was in the studio before I came here, so I'm like, man, I'm flying on dabs, and I'm like, oh yeah, I get to sit down and just punish Matt about all this old shit. So do not worry, we're both on the same level.
cool.
I think on the Cantankerous 7 inch, you guys thank Downcast, right?
Yes, yeah, we played with them and Reality Control and one other big band from Santa Barbara area, but it was at the Red Barn place in Goleta or Isla Vista. They had shows there. It was like connected to the campus, I think, and yeah, that was probably when I was 16 or 17.
They're a band that I think's underrated in terms of their influence. They're like a band that certainly I guess people that saw them talk about a lot, but I think
Hmm.
that record on Ebullition was like the Frampton Comes Alive of DIY hardcore.
So yeah, we were connected. We got connected with them, and through that gig with the guys from Head First, and they were like I think from Irvine, and we all lived in El Toro, Mission Viejo, and we were playing a couple gigs with them, and then so that was like some of the straight edge gigs that we got on, and
Like that's such a cool scene at that point too in terms of the straight edge stuff because I guess it's like I guess Christian is just starting to become a thing in it, but like it feels like there was a lot of just sort of it was like a real open-minded ish seeming
Mm-hmm.
time in terms of like that style of music, which is
Mm-hmm.
not normally known for being the most open-minded place in music.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I don't know, the shows weren't as sketchy, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like because that was the other thing. It's like, you know, I mean, I went to like one Fender's gig, and most of the other ones were like country club or anti club or like, and they were very violent and scary, as you know, everyone talks about, and especially when you're a young kid and you're scrawny and just like so dorky skater, like sometimes it suck, you know, and then at least it was like mellower at those gigs, you know, or I don't know, or it.
You mentioned getting into some of the sludgier stuff around that time, like Alchemy Records. And Alchemy Records is what a cool label, like you said,
Yeah.
Like Poison Idea, the Melvins, Virulence, like everything on
Mm-hmm.
that label fucking
Mm-hmm.
rules.
Yeah, Virulence was actually from the same town as us, Mission Viejo, and there used to be a punk record store in Laguna Hills called Pop Culture, and it was, I think it was connected with this label, National Trust. They put out like the second Vandals record, like Love Canal, and like
I think they did the Personality Crisis record, right? From
I'm not sure. Yeah,
I,
I'm not sure
maybe
actually.
I'm confusing it, but I thought they might have done a big Canadian record too, but maybe I'm confusing with another label.
MIA Detonators. But anyway, they always had their records there, and they were all like promo copies. And the Scott Hill was like the one of the guys that worked there, and I bought records from him like when I was really young. But
That's awesome. And also with Alchemy, it's also wild that there's like a Beefheart connection, right? Because that's like Beefheart's
yes, I
cousin.
yeah, I believe that's correct, and I think he might have played on one of his records.
Yeah.
And but yeah, is it Victor Hayden? I think.
Yeah, Victor Hayden.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, I don't know the whole backstory on that. I've heard bits and pieces from friends up here and stuff, and yeah, it's he sounded like an interesting guy, and I think that like he was, I think Kamala Parks worked for him too, like early on, and then that was like they were all connected with like Tim Johanna with getting Gilman going somehow, and then I don't know exactly like what happened to him, or you know, I think he just kind of split town. I'm not sure.
Yeah, like it's one of those it's one of those labels that just kind of disappears at a certain point. And
Mm-hmm.
Jerry A says one of his big regrets is he went there one time to shake him down for money that they were owed
Mm-hmm.
because I think there were some like issues with money flow, it seems, with some of
Mm-hmm.
these bands. But they put out like arguably the best RKL record,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not the best Poison Idea record, but an incredible Poison Idea record, some of the best Melvins records. Like it was such an important label.
Yeah, yeah. And it was like super influential for us, like right then, like all those records coming out at once, like and and yeah, all of it. It was RKL, seeing them like when that record came out was amazing. That was probably one of my favorite shows that I went to back then at the country club in Reseda. And like but you know, at the same time, like there would always be like mixed bills and stuff too. Like the Offspring, like always played every show, and every, you know, and they were like a different band than like what they became, but it was just like, I don't know. Saw Final Conflict a lot. That they were like really, you know, probably one of the more earlier peace punk hardcore bands in L.A.
Yeah,
Um,
and a band that goes so deep too with Final, like obviously to
yeah,
this
yeah,
day, but like
yep.
I was there in Decline Part 3.
Yep, yep. I forgot about that. Yep. Yeah, you probably had Ron on your show, or Jeff.
No, I gotta have Ron on the show. I've been
Oh
talking
yeah,
about it for
you.
years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He'd be great.
That'll be
He's
awesome.
yeah. He's been like doing so much like his whole life, and I mean, he booked like half the shows that I was going to down there, and and he's still doing it. And
Yeah, yeah, like it's like they're one of those like it's just like it's amazing at that point, like the fact that people were just doing it for the love of it, which is
mhm.
obviously not that people don't do it for the love of it now, but I feel like at that point there's really like no upward mobility in what you're doing. Like the Offspring, no one, I bet, thought that they were going to be, a
Yeah,
million
yeah.
selling band. It's
Yep, yep. And no, it's and a lot of that stuff too was also coming made me think of Nemesis records. Did you ever meet Big Frank? He's no longer with us, but he was like the bouncer at like the Olympic and Fenders and all these places. He also played bass in the band Carrie Nation, and he worked at Zed Records, which is like one of the bigger punk shops in L.A. Long Beach. And but he did the Nemesis records and put out all the first Offspring stuff and like
violent
I don't know.
discrimination, visual discrimination,
Yep.
sorry, and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, one of the rest in peace. And I never
Mm-hmm.
really met, I don't think I ever met him in person, but we definitely interacted online a few
Mm-hmm.
times because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was a huge fan, huge fan
Mm-hmm.
of Nemesis Records, and it is truly like one of those labels that I feel like, like how deep the catalog goes, like you're saying, from the Offspring
Mm-hmm.
to like Uniform Choice to like
Mm-hmm.
a true lifer too in hardcore.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, that was one band I really liked as well. It's Uniform Choice, but they were right like I think they broke up like right when I started going to gigs.
Did you
But
ever see Unity?
no, and I think they have like a Mission Viejo address on one of their records too.
Yeah, I think
And
it's on the 7-inch.
mhm. but no, I mean by the time I was like getting into it, they were like it gone rock or or whatever they went. I don't know.
Was their
But
LP on Fart Blossom or is it on? Oh, I
um
can't remember now. But
it was I think it was their label, Wishing Well Records.
yeah, okay, that makes much more sense then. You're right. It's
Yeah, my friend had they had like a logo with like a skinhead next to like a wishing well and like I remember a bunch of my friends had their shirts, but they did like Unity, First Uniform Choice, and
Youth of Today
Youth of Today, and maybe Blast.
and Shades Apart too. Yeah, they had some
Okay.
like I think those were like the Blast record's weird because I think it's on Wishing Well and then on SST.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm. I think I don't.
I think that's when it works too. But
Mm-hmm.
we got Discogs. People really want to know, they can check their Discogs right now
Yep.
and
Yep.
follow along.
Um, yeah, I started like veering away from straight edge like probably about 89 or so, or like I don't know. I mean, I never was, and I never, it's just something that was always there. It's like if there's a punk show, you go to a punk show,
Were you,
and
were you guys like stoner kids when with Mindrot?
yes, not the whole band, but a few of us. I mean, that's basically like actually Dystopia is probably the first band that I was in where like everybody partied. It was like all my earlier ones is like it just kind of fluctuated. But
How did Mindrot wind up with Wild Rags Records and Richard C? Like one of the most, I think, storied labels in metal.
that was probably mostly through Matt Fisher, our bassist, and I mean I don't know, maybe our singer like we were playing a lot of death metal shows back then, and that scene was like a lot of fun, and there's a lot of cool people were involved, and I don't know. I was like kind of the punk guy of the band, I guess. So I mean, I was into a lot of like Bolt Thrower, Carcass, but I wasn't quite as much like into like the Florida death metal and just I don't know. So I it really wasn't my doing or my thing, but I
Wh-
it was
Where was the sludge influence coming from? Like other, obviously Sabbath, I imagine, but like what was some of the other stuff that you were like, other than
uh
we talked about?
Bolt Thrower. I mean, for Mindrot, like I mean, just all of it,
Yeah.
like anything deviated, concrete socks, like all the peace punk, and then eventually like all those earache bands like started changing their sound, and so we did as well slowly. The other guys started getting more into like kind of like slower doom, Paradise Lost, or like Candlemass, or I don't know. and then like our singer was really getting into like Fields of Nephilim, Sisters of Mercy, and he's like totally, you know, went from doing the, you know, huge guttural like doom voice to like to singing.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it was all that stuff was changing around the same time too.
Well, you
uh,
might have been the punk guy in the band, but you weren't the ska punk guy in the band, right?
nah. Yeah, that would be Evan.
Yeah,
Yep.
Elvin Kilborn. Who would have
Yeah,
thought there was a
yeah.
Mindrot Save Ferris connection?
Oh man, he's an incredible drummer. Like, I mean, he's the type of musician that could be in any band he wants. And but the thing with that band is like they're all his old high school friends. So it was like a given that, you know, they all grew up together. But like he was like in marching band in school, playing drums, and he was old friends with the guitarist of Mindrot, Dan Kaufman, who I believe played flute in marching band in high school, and that's how they met. But they were also like old metalheads. Like when I before Evan was in Mindrot, he was in a band called Conscious Alarm with Steve from Phobia, and he was in Carcinogen for a while, and yeah, they're like full on like Voivod style like metal, I guess. I don't know. And
Yeah, he's an unbelievable drummer. We were listening to it in the studio today. Like I was
mhm.
showing my engineer Mindrot, and then I'm like, yeah, but check this out because, like you're saying, there's not too many more versatile drummers. Did you guys ever play shows together? Because I think mood wise
Oh
and
yeah,
vibe
yeah.
wise, you
No, I
did.
mean,
Say Ferris and Mindrot
oh
did
no,
shows.
oh no, no, no. I thought no, no. We've never
Okay.
played with them. No, I thought
Oh,
you were saying me and Evan playing together, but yeah, we played. He was in the band for 2 or 3 years, and then I left.
yeah, you guys are on the live in the studio demo together,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of I think another recording or two.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, if you guys played a show together, people would have like emotional whiplash, like which is
But I mean, back then it wouldn't be that abnormal. I mean, like we mainly played with like crust, peace punk, death metal, grindcore, but and power violence too. But even so, there'd be, you know, you play a random party in Huntington Beach or somewhere, and like, you know, with a reggae band or just this or that. It just it.
did you guys play with Voodoo Glow Skulls?
Yes, we played with Voodoo Glow Skulls, and it was with Public Humiliation. You ever hear them? They did a
Yeah,
couple records in the '80s. They were like just totally like goofy, like Dr. Demento punk or something.
and
Like
they're on Fart Blossom too, I think.
I think so. Yeah. So Fart Blossom was like what, like Pillsbury Hardcore,
Yeah,
or was that? Yep. Okay.
Pillsbury Hardcore, and then Dave Grohl's band Dane Bramage was on
Oh, I
there,
didn't know that. Okay.
and
Huh.
uh, Justice League, and it's a once again like another one of those labels. Oh, Subculture from North Carolina is also
Hmm.
on there.
Okay.
There's it's another one of those labels that I feel like kind of gets overlooked a little bit in terms of like, wow, what a weird, amazing catalog that this thing had.
Yeah, I that was again before my time, but I believe he had a store and a distro, the Bob Fart Blossom, and he was like a you know, pretty consistent trader guy and stuff. But I used to work with the drummer of Public Humiliation, so I got some stories from him. And actually, their bassist lives up here in Berkeley now too. So
That's awesome. I love those records.
they're they're definitely a place in the time of the '80s, and it's I don't know how like how well it would age now. I don't know. I mean, it's not like, you know, like any of it's like really in terrible taste or anything. It's just so goofy and corny that like I don't know if people would be into it if discovering it now, you know.
You mentioned Apocalypse earlier, and
Mm-hmm.
there's like that split that you guys do is such a great record, and
Oh wow, thanks.
there's like a cool. I don't know, like I felt like Mind Rot was on like a trajectory, and then at a certain point you leave the band, right? Because I think, well, I don't know why. What was there a reason for you leaving?
I just had some funk with the bassist after a while, and I was also just like kind of just I don't know, veering away from. I wasn't as into some of the later stuff. Just with the, I don't know, it just changed a lot, and it wasn't totally my thing. But
Because they signed a relapse, right? Like shortly
yes,
after you
mm-hmm,
leave.
mm-hmm,
And like it feels like, and I don't mean to put this on you, but Dystopia, which I guess you kind of do immediately after, is vibe wise kind of like a different way. And I've even read old interviews back then where you guys were like, yeah, we'd never signed to that label or anything like that.
so when Dystopia started, it was with Dan Kaufman, who was the guitarist, the other guitarist in Mindrot, and he was singing. And so he was in the band for like the first year or so, probably about like 8 or 10 gigs. And then he quit to focus on Mindrot. And then I stuck around for maybe a couple more years. And then I left to do Dystopia. Um, and then we started, I don't know. I mean, it was weird time because like all the bands, like, especially like the Earache template and all this stuff, all these bands that were coming through, like, they're Napalm Death, Carcass, what have you, they kind of all blew up at once, and then they did the Groin Crusher tour, and that stuff got like really popular. And then I think so a lot of people were, trying to, get signed and do the same thing, and we were just like, let's just put out a demo and just I don't know, let's just, we can put out our own records, and we just weren't interested in doing that, I guess. And it's weird that like we were the first band to like go on tour out of all of our friends that were doing it. And yeah, I don't want to talk any trash
No,
right
I don't want to
now.
make you either, but because I feel like the vibe of Dystopia, like right out of the gate, it kind of had a super group feel. Like I'm not going to pretend like I was a day one getting the demo fan, but
Mm-hmm.
like there was just like a vibe about the band. It felt like almost immediately that was like this band's got a different sensibility, and I don't just mean that in terms of like the approach to business. I mean that like musically, aesthetically, than a lot of stuff that was happening at that time.
Um, I mean, we'd already like had different bands because it was when we started. It was before Dino was in the band. We had Phil Martinez, who was the drummer of Apocalypse, and Todd was coming from playing bass in Confrontation, and then Dan and I were in Mindrot. So we were already like had kind of done similar bands, but they were different. And then I don't know, and then Phil left, and we got Dino in the band. We were all like practicing. We had this rad like practice studio complex. It was like a storage unit in Santa Ana, and just roll up doors. But it was like they were renting out to bands, and there was probably like 8 to 10 practice rooms all throughout the studio or the storage facility, and it was like Mind Rot, Confrontation, Morgian, Carcinogen, Phobia, like all, and then a bunch of other bands that were kind of like, maybe more like, I don't know, grunge or indie. And it was like this rad little community. We were always, there every night, practicing, hanging out, checking out each other's bands and stuff. And so, I mean, it's kind of how it is. Like after I moved up here, it's like the scene's kind of small in a way, and then everyone becomes friends, and then next thing you know, you're all in different bands together. So I think that's like, we had a little more of an idea of what we wanted to do rather than it being like our first or second band even. And and then just that whole like vibe of just, all this, the energy from all these bands, like, hanging out and gigging, and just like all became really good friends. And I don't know, that I think that contributes a lot to it too. It's just the enthusiasm that everyone had for it.
I read an interview with you guys, like a super old interview where, and I'm sure this is half joking, but you said you guys were united by the fact that you wanted to talk about and were interested in the stuff that other people didn't want to talk about?
Hmm. Yeah, that would have been Dino that probably said that.
I think
But
it was Dino.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's weird. Yeah, like people were like definitely singing against about the system and about racism and inequality and war, but like I don't know, we were also just like no one really sang about like domestic violence or like or I don't know or you know drive-by shootings really. I mean, eventually, or maybe they. I'm sure there was like yeah, I don't know. There had to have been a bands be singing about that before us, but I just can't think of any at the moment. You know,
Yeah, I was just
that
saying.
were from like I guess the same genre that we're from.
Yeah, like there are definitely bands that sang about hating work and hating
Hmm.
having to go to a job, but I think a lot of that was tongue in cheek in punk, and I feel like there was like a real emotional, and I don't mean this in sort of like an emo way, but like an emo kind of quality to what you guys were doing, where it was like true emo, where like it's pure emotion that's coming
Hmm.
across, and there's
Hmm.
no humor to kind of mask like, oh, I hate my job, ha ha ha. It's like, no, this thing's fucking killing me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Dino and I always had jobs too. Like that guy's a hard working motherfucker, but he's also like hard for other people like that don't appreciate him to deal with him because he's got so much energy sometimes, you know. But I mean, that dude is a hard working motherfucker.
Yeah.
And
Well, and you guys all had labels. Like the work ethic in the band is higher than a lot of bands.
yeah, I don't know. I don't really think about it that way. I mean, we just did it out of joy and necessity. It's like we wanted to put our stuff out. We didn't want to like ask anyone to put our stuff out for us. And we, I mean, we didn't think it was going to be huge or anything. We just wanted to put out a record and try to play gigs. And I don't know. There was no ambition outside of that at all.
It's interesting because like I played in a band for God 20 plus years, and then before that in a bunch of other bands. And the one band people want to know about playing was when my old band opened for Dystopia in Toronto at the Lions Club.
Oh wow, what band was that?
Don Louis.
Oh wow, holy shit, I didn't know. Wow.
Yeah, it was all of or half of Fucked Up was in the band, and it was
And
yeah, that show was insane.
so was Mike in that band too,
Yeah,
or
Mike
okay?
Mike
And
was the guitar player, and he booked that show for you guys too.
yeah, yeah. No, we've texted about it, like, like yeah, because that was the show where the toilet like broke off the wall, and and
And They Live fans got into a huge fight brawl with the Toronto Crusties.
oh, I don't remember that at all.
It was because yeah, They Live and Buffalo in general was like kind of a more hardcore scene than the Toronto
Hmm.
had at that time. It was
Hmm.
like a lot more crusty kind of scene. And I feel like Dystopia was a band that even back then, obviously now it's incredible to kind of see how the legend has grown about this band. But even back then, there was this mystique and legend where it seemed like you brought out people from all different kind of tribes that weren't as united as you guys were with the Voodoo Glow Skulls in Mindrot kind of vibe.
Um,
And
yeah, I don't
sometimes, at
know.
least in Toronto at that show.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, we were just very fortunate to get gigs with like all sorts of different bands, and I think the thing that's also weird is just like no one could figure out like what we were about at the time, and you know, it's like and not it just not just our music, but just like three, four guys coming into town and like they all just look random, like pulled from a police lineup, and like none, like you know, like some bands they all look the same. Like you see all four, like, oh yeah, you guys are in a band together. But it's you know, it's and I think it was like for a few years where like we weren't really popular at all, or like people are just like they thought we were nice people. It seemed like we had friends, but like it just, I don't know. People like, yeah, we'll book you. It's okay, and we'd get good gigs sometimes, but I think most people just couldn't figure it out, and uh, I don't know. And to us, it's just like, well, this is what we do. Like,
Because but the time you came to Toronto, it's a few years into the band, and I think the legend had kind of grown. And it's interesting because today I was flipping through zines, just reading old Dystopia interviews, and found you guys kind of talking about, yeah, we're going to Canada on this next tour. If we get in, I hope we get in. And it's
well,
like,
I
well, you
mean,
guys got in. It worked out.
so that is the hardest border that I've ever been through, and I'd been to Canada. It's like the summer of '95 with two friends. We traveled cross country from Vancouver to Montreal one summer. It's like, took us about a month to get from point A to point B, but we camped all through there and stuff. I actually like had family friends that were like, yes, come visit us. And they tore all the panels off my truck, just like gutted everything. And then even I remember the thing back then was like, you had to usually have like a fake recording contract. And it was Yannick that was usually our guy, like that hooked it up. And then there was also there's another guy too that I can't remember, but he was like, we met him through the One Eyed God Prophecy guys. They were a great band.
Great band.
Yeah, and we played with them once. It was like Los Crudos, Charles Bronson, MK Ultra, One Eyed God Prophecy, and then we played with One Eyed God Prophecy again like 3 weeks later in North Carolina, and it was just like one of those things where you just meet like random friends like in a band like on the road, and then you're on tour and it's, oh hey, good to see you again, like yeah, we made it, like
Because by the time you guys came to Toronto, the legend had grown to such a point that I remember sitting there with Chris Callahan, who sings in Cursed and Left for Dead back then, and all these bands. He and I are sitting there, and we're like, what are they going to be like? Like, there's the Razor and the Seven in the split with Man as a Bastard. It's like, what are these vibes? And we're like, and then you came over, and he was selling records, like some of his records, and I don't know if it was you or someone else in the band picked up a Dayglow Abortions record and was like, "Oh my god!" and bought the Dayglow Abortions record. Was like, "Oh shit! Look at this record I just got."
it's probably Dino. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm certain I used to have that record. I'm sure all three of us had that record at one point, but it was probably Dino
yeah, because
because
it wasn't the good one. It's one of the later ones too.
oh, with the hamster on the like in the
No, I
gun,
think
or
I
like
think it's the
the
canoe thing with the woman painted on the cover,
mhm.
like the pink sleeve
Yeah.
one. Uh,
Okay.
it was deeper than I go in their catalog.
Rad. No, we always had really good times up there in Montreal and Sherbrooke, and lots of great gigs with Seized and Wizzagoth. They all took really good care of us. I think with that first time in Toronto, we stayed with it was like Dave and Katie who did a zine, like Fetch Suppliers. I think they interviewed us, but
Oh, was it Katie from Rammer?
I
Katie
don't
Whitaker?
know.
Oh, I wonder if it was Katie. It makes sense because
Hmm.
all these people are still around, right? Like that's the thing. It
Hmm.
was the community was so small
Hmm.
back then that everyone just kind of knew everyone, and everyone's still kind of in this thing.
Yep. And but yeah, so when I did that cross country trip, it was me and that Steve Berta from Phobia, and our friend from England was visiting. This guy Bry, who sang in the band Embitter and Manfat,
Oh,
and
fuck.
I just like split up with my girlfriend, and he was visiting, and it's like, oh well, let's just go on a road trip. I'm just gonna put my stuff in storage and let's party, So and we go up to Vancouver, and we didn't think we were gonna stay there for very long, but we were thinking, God, it was so hard to get into the country, and if we can either go east and go through like Montana, South Dakota, or whatever, or we go through Canada, and like so we did this amazing trip, and we were also like, we had Book Your Own Life with us, so like we were calling places, and we also picked up this hitchhiker, like deadhead kid, like in Calgary somewhere, and he ended up like on the trip with us for like the whole month, and he took great care of us. He knew like where every shelter was, or every like you get free food or whatever, and he's giving us acid, and we're just partying through Canada, and then but we made it to Spiderfest. Are you familiar with Spiderfest?
Yes, it is a
That's not.
very infamous festival that has come up several times on this show.
Have
That
you been? You haven't been?
No, it is one of those things that I didn't drive at the I was too young to drive there at that point, and so you just hear stories and Jesse from the band DBS, the old Vancouver punk band, was on here and
Hmm.
talked about how when they played there, all of a sudden a naked man fell from the tree or something on top of
Sounds
their
about
band.
right. Yeah. So we ended up at this place because we were gonna. What was it? I think we went up to like Winnipeg or something, and when we were gonna go south to Minneapolis and connect with the Profane Exist, like Dan from Profane and a bunch of people there. And when I was on the phone with him, he's like, "Oh, well, there's this big festival happening in Canada next weekend that we're all going to. You should just like stay in Canada, go check that out." So we're like, "Let's do it." We'd already dropped off the our deadhead friend, like, and he was just gonna keep hitchhiking back to Quebec. We drove like an hour or so south, turned around, picked him up hitchhiking, and kept going to Spiderfest. And then when we got there, it was, God, at least like 600 to 800, maybe 1,000 kids, mostly from Quebec and Toronto. This is like summer of '95, and but that was also where I met the guys in Fuckface, and Hickey, I believe, played, and it was Deformed. No, it was State of Fear.
That's crazy. What a lineup
And
too for those bands to go and have to play this nightmarish.
yeah, but it was like at least a 3 or 4 day fest, and like going all day long, just free camp. It's like acres of property, free camping, and they had food trucks and beer trucks. Maybe there was there's people like doing piercings and tattoos there, stuff, and just like all of these like wasted like crusties from Montreal. It was incredible.
And the
And
guy who ran it was like some 70-year-old punk rocker
mhm.
dude or something.
Yeah, I looked him up recently, and I think he passed away like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was like a old school punk rock guy that like just opened his whole property up and let people squat there, and it was really like I read like a memorial about him, and one kid was like, "This guy saved my life. Like I was a junkie, this and that, and he helped me like go back to school, and I went to culinary school, and I got all because of him, and yeah, everyone in the town like seemed to really be supportive of it, because I remember like we walked in to get more beer or something, and then we're hitchhiking back, and this family pulls over to pick us up, and we're all just like dirty punk rockers, and they're like, "Get out of the way, kids! Like let these guys. We're giving them a ride, And it's just
That's so awesome.
and but at the same time, I heard other stories that like one of the other neighbors tried to burn his house down. So it was I don't know the whole gist of it, but it was incredible. And
Yeah, he's like one of those guys that exists sort of pre, obviously passing away recently, but like pre-internet. So there's not like a lot of the lore was sort of like oral history,
mhm,
and
mhm,
it definitely, like you're saying, there's these sort of benevolent figures in punk that didn't necessarily play in a band, but had
mhm.
huge impact on this
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
And he
yeah.
definitely seems like one of those guys.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he provided a space for art and entertainment to grow and thrive, and yeah.
Was Vancouver popping at that point in terms of cannabis? Was it Amsterdam area? Like, were there like, because
In
like,
Vancouver, I was only there for a couple days. But this is like 95. So
How did the razor blade and the grief split come about?
um I think it was just a joke that we were having, like just on the phone, or like we were really good friends with those guys, and they had come out, and just before that 7-inch came out, they came out to California and did some gigs. I think they played, like, we played with them in LA, and I think they played Gilman and maybe a couple other spots. But and they, they stayed with us, and we became really good friends, and we were doing this split. I think it was because like both of our bands had songs about suicide, so it was just like a joke, like, here you go, like here's some music, here's some razor blade.
Was it actually laser etched with Dystopia?
So some of the later ones are actually, I have one right here. Let's see.
Oh, that's crazy.
So our friend, our dear late friend Steve Kerper, the drummer of Confrontation, made these. He was working at like a machine shop or something, and they had like all this equipment to do it. I think he made like maybe 100 of them or something. I'm not sure. I don't think there were more than 100 or 200, but because when we pressed that record originally, it was like we did 2,000 copies, and then it was all just regular store-bought razor blades. And yeah, I remember like when I finally met with Dan from Profane, we were hanging out, and he was like, "Yeah, you guys, man, we had to take out all those razor blades. Like, we couldn't sell them because we thought that we were going to get in trouble." And like, and I still have like a big jar of them, and we were just like, "No, like, why'd you do that?" But I
There's a
think
oh, go on, sorry.
it might have been around the time, like, because I remember like there was like the Doom Police Bastard record that like they had some trouble with like German authorities, because it had the Bobby had a swastika on it, and so it might have been around the same time they were getting heat from that, and I don't know.
Did you guys ever find out from anyone if they ever got cut by it, by that razor blade falling out? Because there's Jonah from Fucked Up, his old band Career Suicide, or sorry, his old band Board of Education, ripped it off for their band's demo,
Oh
and
yeah,
a bunch of people
rad.
got cut.
I mean, like, we always had the sleeves on them, so I don't
Yeah,
know. I never heard anyone getting cut from it, but yeah.
there's another California band, I think Parental Advisory, that had a razor blade on the sleeve of their 7-inch.
Okay, huh?
But it, like, yeah, like I've always, when I finally found that 7-inch back then, didn't have the razor blade in it. But I think that was
You probably got it from Profane
profane. Yeah,
Existence,
definitely.
or the shop or whatever bought it from their distro. So
Yeah, there I am, one of the victims of their censorship of their art. Because you're friends with the Voodoo Glow Skulls.
no, we're not. I've never.
Oh,
I've no that I've never been friends with them. That was just
okay.
a random show.
Okay,
But
good. I was going to wonder then how you sat on the Voodoo Glow Skulls hickey beef.
oh, that's amazing.
It's the best beef in the history of
Yeah,
music.
yeah, yep, yep. No connection with them other than just playing that random gig. So, but we were connected with the band Public Humiliation, and they were friends of ours. But I can't. There was some other band that I feel like were kind of popular that played too, that were like more on the ska punk side of things back then. And I'm blanking on it, but
I think it's such a cool, like, that would be such a fun show to go to because you're getting super depressed from Mindrot, and then someone cheers you up with the sunny side of Southern California.
I mean, it was just one of those random things too. Like, there was probably like 50 people at that gig, and it was
Yeah.
just, just totally random. No, no one looked all the same, or just, just.
I think this is on your Wikipedia, but it says that your last, or Mindrot's last show, but I guess you would have left the band, but Greg Ginn was there, was one of the few people
He,
that went to the show.
that was long after I left.
But was he kind of around the scene and like checking out bands like that at that time?
Well, I mean, that was probably when SST was in Long Beach,
Yeah.
and I think their last show was in Long Beach, so
Okay, that makes
that
sense
would
then.
make, yeah, yeah. I think that was like when they had like a storefront or whatever.
Yeah,
And
where Pat Smear worked.
okay, well that was didn't they have one in Hollywood too?
Oh yeah, he worked at the one in
Okay,
Hollywood. Sorry,
all right.
that's it. I read once again in one of these zine interviews that you got deported one time for throwing up in the sink of a plane.
Uh, we almost didn't get let in the country for that.
That's it. I think the joke must be that you guys said you got deported after that happened
uh,
in the
so
interview.
so that was also connected with grief. This was our first tour of Europe, and the blame all falls on me. And but so we were flying from LAX to Germany, and we had a like a 2 or 3 hour layover in Boston. And so Terry from Greece, like, oh, I'll meet you guys in the parking lot, and I'll bring you some beers, and we can hang out and smoke some grass before you go to Germany. We're like, cool. And it was, back before like 9/11, where there was, you could just walk in and out of airports. And so we went and partied in his van, and then we get on our plane, and it was free wine and beer the whole flight. We're just like, yes. And it was a very long night. It was a very long flight. At one point, we are all pretty faded, but I'm sitting on the aisle seat, and I pass out, like just my body hanging over the aisle. And a woman walks by with a concession cart and knocks me in the head. And I thought it was Dino or Todd, like hitting me, or just, and I just, fuck you. I lift my middle finger up at this poor woman, and she's like, ah! Like, and so she calls like more of the staff, and they come over, and they're scolding me. And Dino's like, oh yeah, it's okay. He's just, it's the altitude, and he's just, the wine is like, he's okay. Next day, sun's coming up. Everyone's in line to go to the bathroom, and I have to throw up so badly. And I'm like, I should have just like remembered that there's usually barf bags in front of you, but I was just like, I'm gonna just go to the bathroom. Every line, every stall had like 5 or 6 people, and it's finally just coming up my throat. And I'm running, and then there's like it's like the sink where they're preparing food and stuff between the stalls, and I just, and so that was like the final straw. The captain comes out, demands my passport, says the authorities are going to be waiting for you when you arrive. They'll take care of you. And we're just like, none of us had ever been to Europe before, and we're just, oh my god, we're so screwed. Like, we're gonna get deported or like arrested. And they're just like, what the fuck, Mouse? Like, and I was afraid the whole tour was gonna get canceled. So we were getting off the plane, we grab our stuff, we're just trying to covertly cruise by customs and everything. And sure enough, there's authorities waiting for us. And they grilled us for about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. And at one point we see like a woman with a wheelchair, and she says something to someone across the room, and then that someone points at us with this wheelchair. So she comes running over for a wheelchair for me. And finally the police just scolded us, and then just laughed at us. They said that they threatened to not let us in the country, and we're like pleading with them. And then they took one look at each other and just busted out laughing, and they're just like, get the fuck out of here.
what,
So
what was the
uh,
rest of that European tour like?
well, so we get picked up by our friend Andreas from ADC Diablo, and we drive from, I think it was Frankfurt to Saarbrücken, where they're from. And we go to their practice room, and this is like a 2 or 3 hour drive. We get there, we're hanging out front. It's kind of like this old building by railroad tracks. We're there for 10 minutes, and the police show up. They see Dino, and they arrest him. And they claim that he matches a description of a mugging suspect from the night before. And we're just like, we've only been in the country for like 2 hours, and but they took him away and made him stand in a police lineup with a number.
Welcome to Europe.
Yep. So, but we had a real good tour after that. We did half the tour. Are you familiar with Mine from Switzerland? They
Oh
did
yeah.
a 7-inch. Actually, they did Yannick when he did Great American Steak Religion. He put out their LP,
Yeah.
and but when we toured with them, they had like a 7-inch and maybe a splitter. I can't remember, but we did 2 weeks or so with them, and then 2 weeks or so with ABC Diablo, and like we hit it off like fabulously with both bands, and the people from the label Common Cause. They're the ones that helped fly us over and book the tour, and they put out our CD, and the CD came out like second day of tour, which was like super fun because it's like, hey, we'd never done a CD before, and that they were still like really new, like back when it was like 94, at least new to us. Like I only had like 4 CDs in my collection or something.
Yeah, like
And
hardcore bands didn't really do them. Like it wasn't until
mhm.
later that they became like a thing.
Right. And so that was like, and then like not only having a CD come out, but like, being in Hanover, Germany, and like looking at this thing for the first time, and then we're starting this tour, and it was incredible.
It
And
feels like Europe got you guys before North America did. Like in the
yes,
punk scene.
that was well, at least for touring, because I mean, we only played in LA and OC before we went to that European tour, and then we did that 94, and then we did the US tour with Skaven in 95. And
Recently, Randy from Lamb of God was on here,
mhm.
and he was talking about how in the mid to late 90s, you almost have a second wave of American crossover, but this time it's coming much more out of the underground. And if you kind of look at where metal music has gone, certainly in more recent years, like it really has kind of come out of, and even, going back then, like you look at like Napalm Death and all those types of bands in the UK, and then certainly all the stuff that was happening in America around then, like there was this sort of like, it felt like, I guess, metal music, mainstream metal music had gotten really bland, and it was like underground kind of crossover with
Mhm.
punk where all this really interesting shit was happening.
Yeah, we played with his old band Burn the Priest a couple times, both in Richmond in 96, and then in New York. We played at CBGB's with them in 99.
He told me a story actually when he was here that you guys and Disassociate
Mhm.
drank a Indian restaurant out of beer that night after the show.
I guess we did. I remember we had a great feast, and but I don't remember the beer running out. But that sounds about right because there was probably like 15 of us or so. We had a great time, and it was great. All those people were awesome, and we became really good friends with Ralphie and Disassociate guys and stuff. And yeah,
How did the 8-track with the Melvins come about on your label?
um, so after so Dystopia went to Japan in '99, and we toured with Corrupted and Hellchild. And the one thing that, and my buddy from Europe had gotten one before I left, and it was a mini disc recorder, and they were brand new. And but they were like, it seemed like a pretty like available item in Japan, but really hard to find in the US. And so I bought one when I was over there. I still have it, still works great, has a stereo condenser mic. And so when I came back, I was recording gigs with it. And I recorded, I don't know, I have a lot of stuff that I did back then, but one of them was a Melvins gig, and it came out really good. And we had mutual friends through the band Lost Goat, who I put out their first record, co-released it with them, and then I'd been on a couple tours with them, and they were good friends with Dale. I think Dale's probably played on one of their records before, And so they put me in contact with him, and he had agreed to doing an 8-track version of it, because I had like a component, like it was like a woolen sack 3M or something, but it was, you know, like a component, like really nice deck, probably from the 60s or 70s, and it worked great, and it made really good recordings. And so I was experimenting with it, and I was just like, oh, this could be fun, and maybe I could talk them into doing it. And so he agreed to it, and I made 100 of them, and it took forever to make them because, you know, at first I was just sourcing them from, you know, thrift stores and uh, maybe eBay, but like the problem is, like, you couldn't get any brand new 8 tracks, and then the old ones. What happens is there's like it's a continuous loop tape, and then there's like a piece of aluminum foil that holds the tape together, and that's what sends the signal to the machine to change from track 1 to track 2 to track 3. That always would die on me. I didn't have like the materials or whatever to fix it, so I would be recording them, but I have to play test them before I record them just to see if it would even work, and then I'd have to record one at a time. And I got through like 40 or 50 of them, and then I finally found a place online that I could buy like refurbished used 8 tracks from. Kate's Track Shack. It was like somewhere in like Mississippi or somewhere, and so I bought the rest then, and I gave them the first 50, and then I barely even sold any. I mostly just gave them away to friends. I think Bottleneck like maybe took like 10 or 15 of them, and but obviously I was curious if that would come up, and I'll show you an interesting thing that I acquired by doing that. Do you recognize this kid?
Who's that kid?
His name is Danny Cooksey, and he played Sam in the show Different Strokes. He's like Arnold's like little stepbrother.
Yeah.
And so I you know, I was buying these 8 tracks like on eBay and wherever, and I bought like, I think a lot of 20 or 30 of them from some Rastafarian guy in LA named Ross Dave. And it was just a whole like random mishmash of 8 tracks. But I have not found any evidence of this thing online anywhere. And this is his demo when he was 4 years old. And you can even see the writing on it. It's written by his grandmother. And it says February 4th, birthday. He's going to be on maybe Fantasy Island. There's the phone number, and has his birthday. I'm guessing it's his grandmother or his mom or something, but it's his demo 8 track.
That's amazing.
So I found this guy on Instagram, and I keep meaning to like shoot him a message like, "Hey man, I got your 8 track."
You got to. Like, I'm sure there's like none of those surviving.
Yeah, well, and especially if like if he doesn't have one, then I should send it to him, right? You know, I mean, just
Yeah, like I just like even like to hear that. Have you listened to it? What is it?
Oh yeah, it's all covers, you know. Looking for love in the wrong places. Okie from Muskogee, Family Tradition, Elvira, Take This Job and Shove It, Fight Inside of Me.
Why haven't you reissued this on the label?
Yeah, I should bootleg it.
Yes. This needs to be heard by people out there.
Yep.
Have you ever seen that 8-track documentary?
I did, I think like years ago. And,
Yeah, I think it's on YouTube. It's such a great, like, I love that kind of, like how upset everybody gets when someone sells, I think it's like the Sex Pistols one for $100.
Oh yeah. Clash and Devo and like, you know, Stooges, MC5.
There's a Teenage Head one that I've been looking for forever.
Wow.
But, yeah, my friend has it, but he's not willing to part. So
no, I know I bought one, like a new Cheap Trick 8-track from their site, I think like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. So I mean, there's people they're making them that I think they're all still like, new old stock or just being re-recorded and if you have the right tools and stuff, you could just like install brand new tape, because I think it's just like random quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape.
Yeah,
And
like we did one, I guess, 15 years ago, maybe a little
mhm.
longer. And the guy told me one time, he's like, I got bored halfway through doing it, so half of them are just Screeching Weasel records.
Classic.
He's like, I couldn't listen to your record anymore because, like you're saying, you have to listen to it in real time.
Yeah,
Listen to it
yeah.
back
For
back.
a while, I bought a second deck too. So for a while, I had two going at once. But I was really trying to make sure that like they weren't going to break. I didn't want to, and I still put on like a disclaimer on the Melvins saying like, if it breaks, you're shit out of luck. Like,
Yeah,
but I did my best to at least play test them and make sure that,
and none of them are playing Screeching Weasel.
no, none of them
Yeah.
played Screeching Weasel. So
Has it surprised you the level of interest that there seems to be kind of in dystopia from a younger generation of kids? Or
yeah,
not that it seems to be, there is.
very much so, because I mean, we started to get a little more popular near the end, but it was like for the most of our tours, like people were just like, oh, who are these guys? They're weird. Like, oh, I kind of like this. I don't know. Like, I can't figure them out. Like, and I don't know, but I think, I mean, we, it seems to resonate with skaters, which is where we all came from. And then like, because we were also like featured on a couple of old anti-hero videos, I think like in 2000s or so. And then we were also on a graffiti doc called, I think it's Piece by Piece. I could be wrong. I think that's what it is. But our friend Abhor, he was like featured in it, and he wanted to use Dystopia for like for his footage, and so I think that might have helped too. And I, I don't know.
I think the
I,
records have aged really well. Like they sound very contemporary when you listen to it. Like I feel like maybe a lot of other bands were influenced by you and kind of copied your steez, and that's why it sounds so fresh. But it does have, like going back and re-listening to it, I'm like, yeah, this could have come out like last year, this year.
I mean, I honestly think that like everyone that's doing music now is just like they've just upped the game like so much in quality and like and everything. Like I don't know, when I hear a lot of our old stuff, it just makes me cringe, because there's just I don't know, I look at it differently, and I just like, oh god, what were we thinking? Or like I don't know, there's just certain things, but I don't know, like it seems like the stuff that I hear now, like people have like figured out all of these different genres and like the best way to like get tones and just make really good records and do it cheaply too. I mean, I don't know, like there was all the early recordings we did, it was like there was like a couple guys in Santa Ana that like didn't really have any connection with punk or metal, but they had a recording studio, and that was where you recorded, just like out of necessity, where it wasn't, like we didn't have like a Don Zientara or like I don't know, like somebody that like understood as much what we were doing, and we really had to like go in there and do our best to like, because we knew what we wanted, but we had shitty gear, and then we had to like translate our ideas to someone that's just like, no, you shouldn't do that. And a lot of the earlier stuff, like Cantankerous recorded, and some of the earlier Mindrot stuff, like that engineer, like he did a good job, but we just didn't communicate with him. But the one thing that we worked with this engineer producer named Jim Barnes, and he was like a lot of fun to work with. And even though he didn't he figured it out like once he started recording all these bands, like what each one was going for. But he was like a really fun guy to hang out with and party with, and like he was really easy to work with, and he really made us feel comfortable in his studio, and we enjoyed working with him. And so I think that helped. Like,
I think you're also what you're saying, like the fact that you guys didn't have the quote unquote best gear, or you weren't working with, these engineers that were really dialed into what you were doing, or were able, like, I think because of that, there's like a uniqueness to what you're doing that now when you can have access to like the perfect emulator of the perfect amp, and like everyone can be so dialed in on stuff, you kind of lose that like spontaneity almost, or ingenuity that kind of breed that it can only come from having to figure it out because you don't have access to all
mm-hmm.
this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, it was like, what kind what kind of amp do you have? Like, why did you get that amp? It was like, because it was the only one they had at the guitar shop in my city, and like, and I don't know, and we didn't know like what good gear was, or we did, and if you see Marshall, it'd be like, I don't want that because that's what Guns N' Roses uses, or whatever,
Yeah,
like it
yeah.
just, and so we really didn't know what we were doing in that regard, but we knew what we wanted it to sound like we liked like how like the early earache like records all sounded, and like all the ENT or this or that, like we wanted our guitars to sound mean and heavy, but like we didn't know like how to do that.
There's a meme that I saw a couple years ago, or maybe it was even this year, and it's a picture of you, and it says, "Proof that in the right skilled hands, even a metal zone can be made to sound good."
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I liked about that pedal was the sweepable EQ. Like, there's just something about it. Like, it's got like a parametric EQ on the mids, and so I just figured out one day like how it worked for my tone. And I mean, like a lot of time, I just had like this. I bought this like 70-watt custom head. It used to be a combo, and it's like custom's like the one that make all those like tuck and roll amps that like CCR was using and stuff. And I just bought like the guts of a head with no shell for like $70 when we were on tour in Detroit. And then I just ended up. It sounded good. It was 70 watts, and it was okay, cool. And we never really had decent gear until probably like 99 2000.
And there, but you're like, you just figured it out, like, because your tone is so fucking sick, and it's just like, but it's because you had to figure out how to make this stuff make that tone.
Yeah, and I mean, so it was also like competing with Todd, who wanted just like the most low end and like guttural, like he wanted to distort his amp by having the strings tuned as low as possible, and then having the volume and the bass all the way up, and just like that's what he wanted. And he was blowing cabinets like left and right, and like, and it sucked. Like I think we blew up like E150's bass cabinet in Spain. I think like there were a few other people, and we're so, oh, sorry, like, we pay you, like, what can we do? And it's just, but so I was like trying to make something that could cut through that, and then but not be too loud, because Dino's never really had like a rat, like he got a really nice kit like in 99 or something, but it was just we used to always joke that it was like a Tinker Toy set or something, because it was just like he had like extra rototoms and stuff that just were always falling over, and just like all mismatched drums, and but he could play the hell out of them, and he could do that and sing at the same time, and like, and he knew where all of them were, and it was just like, you know he's like an octopus with it. But
Yeah. Well, there's that. I think it's like Darby Allin used the Dystopia song on
mm-hmm,
an AEW pay per view.
mm-hmm.
Friend of the show, been here a couple times.
Oh, cool. No, I've only heard about him through Scotty, and we're supposed to meet him someday.
He's a
But
madman. He's right now training to climb Mount Everest, having never climbed a mountain in his life.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's very. I've seen him do some unspeakably horrific things to his body in the name of entertainment, but seeing you guys up there on that pay-per-view, your song being used with him in with Darby Allin in that context, but like that's in the same context as like Living Color, Cult of Personalities being used by CM Punk, or this hip hop song is being used by this artist. So like even with a Tinker Toy drum set and a Metal Zone pedal, like you're competing with these bands that spent millions of dollars on these recordings.
I mean, we were just doing our best with what we had.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
The
But,
first person to kind of bring up the explosion in Dystopia's popularity on this podcast was Tony Molina.
mhm.
Years and years ago, he talked about it on the show, and I was telling my brother about it, and my brother's like, "You guys are exaggerating on the show when you're talking about this Dystopia thing." And then he's like, as he's talking to me, he's dropped his kids off at school and is going to leave his kid's school and runs into a 10-year-old kid wearing a Dystopia shirt at the school. And he's like, "Is that a Dystopia shirt?" To the kid, he's like, "Yeah, they're my favorite California crust band."
Wow. So how is he even finding out about crust bands? Is it like
It's
Spotify
got
or
to be,
like?
or the parents maybe. Like that's what I was like. Maybe the parents are super into it because
Mhm.
even if my brother's exaggerating, it's a 12-year-old. Like it's still insane that it's gone from the basement of the Lions Club with toilets being torn off the walls to the elementary school hallways.
Yep. Wow. And how far radius was that too?
God, like I think you could make that trip on the subway in about 30 minutes.
Wow, interesting.
So yeah, I think it'd be even faster in a car, but I don't have a driver's license, so
Yeah.
I'm still limited in my map knowledge on that.
Yeah. Who would have thunk? Okay,
Matt,
cool.
we are back because we realized that there's a lot more we could talk about, especially from the early cantankerous years, and that's
Mhm.
a double meaning, I guess, cantankerous in that case. But yeah, so like I guess what was sort of some of the reflections that kind of came back to you in the wake of the first conversation we had?
I mean, just mainly going on that tour, I discovered so many different s- scenes and punk subgenres outside of Southern California that I was really interested in. I really wanted to dig into. And at one point, I was going to move to the Bay Area, but like in 1990 when I was finishing high school. We didn't get to go to Gilman, but I had to go there because I got really immersed in all of the early Lookout stuff, like when it was coming out, and when we played in camp in San Francisco, we stayed with a couple friends that worked at MRR, and they were like, "Hey, if you want to come back, like you're welcome to stay here." And I came back like literally 3 weeks later, and I'm like, I'm here. I got to go to Gilman Street. I want to see this stuff. And they were so cool. Hope and Walter Glazer, and they took really good care of me. And at one point, I was going to move up here. I did eventually in '96, but at the time, I was like going to finish high school and move to San Francisco. And so I took the Greyhound up there with a friend and hanging out in San Francisco, and it's like cool. All these gigs are happening at Gilman. I want to go, and none of them wanted to go for some reason. I think they were like doing movie night or something. So I'm like, well, how do I get there? I know there's BART. Like, what do I do? So they gave me the BART itinerary, and you get off at this station, and you can ride your skateboard either from this station or that station. And I ended up going. It was like a Sunday afternoon matinee, and it was not that many people there. But like my first Gilman show, I saw Capitalist Casualties, Green Day, Filth, Blats, and Special Forces.
Together?
Yes,
That's like an all-time classic, Bill.
yes, it is a benefit gig for like a Gilman staff member that was incarcerated. George hated, and it just seemed like it was all mostly locals, like just every band that I had read about, or like, Crimpshrine guys were there, Sticky guys were there, and that's where I met Chris Dodge and Aaron Comet Bus and a bunch of people, and then I went back a few nights later, saw like MDC, Blister, Sins of the Flesh, Econochrist, and I was just like, this is it, and I don't know, I was really determined to get up here after that, and I didn't because I joined Mindrot. So, but I don't know. It just that whole Cantankerous tour, like, kind of made me figure out like what I wanted to focus on too. Because like other half the band was getting into like, I don't know, Dinosaur Jr. and SWA and all these like later SST bands. And then we just stayed with Hope and Walter, and they dubbed me like Street Cleaner from Godflesh, or like, and I was like, no, this is what I'm more interested. And but I was pretty determined to move up here, and then eventually I did 6 years later. But
I think you see in that weekend kind of like why I'm so obsessed with that kind of late 80s, early 90s Bay Area scene. It's because like, yeah, like it's just all over the map, the stuff that's coming out of there. And like, that's a great period for hardcore across the United States. And I think across the world, there's like a lot of really cool things happening in the late 80s, early 90s. But just in terms of like from power violence to pop punk, like the Bay is really exploding at that point. And I think it's almost becomes the punk rock capital at that, like all the labels, distribution things are like all kind of there, right? Like for
I
not,
mean, it was LA too. I mean, there were so many legendary bands, and just so many different time periods, and I it seemed like it got better after I left, but in the time of like 89 to 94, it gotten really dead for a while, and it was still kind of violent, and it just wasn't as easy or as fun for at the time. But then after we moved up here, then all of a sudden there was like the PCH Club and all of these other like DIY venues that popped out, and there are all these other new bands. And luckily, our bass player still lived down here, so we were kind of going back and forth almost like every other weekend.
yeah,
But
like we talked about it last time. I think, and you touched on it there, the violence in LA, I think from what I've just heard, obviously not being there at the time and being a million miles away up here in Toronto, but it seems like there is a transition that goes from like Los Angeles being sort of the center of the zeitgeist of punk rock to like by the mid 90s, like everything seems to be San Francisco or Berkeley or Oakland based in terms of punk rock stuff, and garage rock to more extreme stuff like you guys. Like there's just like and I think it's even reflected in the fact that like Flipside goes from becoming like the, sort of like this really key voice in international punk to becoming less and less of a thing outside of LA. And I think MRR, these MRR in the 90s becomes obviously in the 80s too, but like by the 90s that's like the Bible, right? Like that's like basically a mainstream publication.
I mean, we were still reading Flipside and all that too. And I mean, I loved it down there, but it wasn't it just punk that like kind of pushed me out, as all the evangelical Christians and right wing Republicans, and like I grew up next to the El Toro Marine Base, and it was like for a long time it was, you always hear about like, the punks versus the metalheads or this or that, and it was just the jocks and the Marines against everybody. And I don't know, I like, after I left, they built like one of the largest mega churches not far from my parents' house, where and it's always been ingrained in the culture in Orange County. doesn't seep over as much in LA, I don't think, but I don't know. At one point I was just like, I need to experience something different. And I don't know. It was really exciting to be able to move up to the Bay and work for more of a progressive print shop that wasn't printing like real estate agent or evangelical tracks or this or that, and just all of the history here, like with the hippie movement and the queer community and the radical community. And I don't know, I still love it up here, but I've still like, oh, maybe I should move back down there. Like, I don't know.
It's I guess because like the stereotype internationally is that like yeah, California is this very liberal sort of bastion in otherwise conservative times, and I feel like when you talk to people from there, it's like yeah, definitely in areas, but certainly Orange County and the Inland Empire, like there's places where it's definitely a little more right leaning. Like I just watched that
It's
Bill.
go further out, then it's like forget about
Yeah,
it.
exactly. I just watched that Bill Bartell documentary and talked to Dave Markey and Jordan Schwartz who made it afterwards, and they were just talking about like how Bill's weird aesthetic was like kind of a reflection of sort of the conservative world that he grew up in, like this sort of very rural California that's nothing like Hollywood, and certainly nothing like the Bay Area.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like most of the people that I grew up with in Orange County, like all their families had lived in LA at one point, but like we're like, oh, it's getting scary. There's either gangs or punk rockers or all this stuff. So like my dad grew up in Hollywood, and he was like, I don't want to raise my kid here. I'd rather raise him in Orange County. But then where did I go hang out like when I grew up?
Yeah, like I feel like it's a like and also like you're saying the real estate side of it was just something that have underestimated, and Frank Black was brought it up like how like the conservative Christian movement at the time wasn't sort of this Jesus freak hippie thing that had happened a generation earlier. This was like a very much like prosperity based version of evangelical Christianity, and it was buy and spend money and sort of this very it doesn't seem to be in line with the values of the historical Jesus as represented in the Bible.
No, I mean, my parents took me to church, and we were Presbyterian, but it was pretty low level compared to everything that I was experienced once we moved to Orange County, because they had this big mega church called Calvary Chapel that I think it was founded in the 60s with like a bunch of hippie kids that like went Christian. And there's like a guy named Lonnie Frisbee or something, and they all got like kind of kooky like hippie evangelical stuff. And this church ended up like opened a big complex in Anaheim, and they had skate ramps, and they'd have shows. And then like in high school, they would have these assemblies and events that it wasn't supposed to be Christian, but those were the only people that they were hiring under commission to perform. And one of them was these guys called the Power Team. They were like weightlifters, and they would bend steel and rip phone books in half and blow up hot water, but kind of like Thor from Canada.
Yes, exactly.
And they were doing this at our school, and then they'd be like, hey, we're going to do another gig afterwards at this church down the street, like come on down. But they also booked this band, the Altar Boys.
I was going to ask you. I've wanted to talk about this band forever with someone. Yes.
I think I've seen them twice, at least once.
Oh,
And
amazing.
so one was at like a high school, and then one was either like at a Catalina like YMCA camp or something. Have you seen any of their videos?
I've watched as much as I can find on YouTube, which is not much. Like there's some records because it's they also were oh, what was the other name? They changed. They had another name too, right? Like Michael Knott was in the group, who I've been told is kind of the bad boy of Christian music, like a Christian alternative music, where because he smokes cigarettes and I guess is not quote unquote a good Christian in a lot of these people's eyes. But yeah, they have this record, U.S. Kids, I think is the LP. That's phenomenal. Like it's like one of my all time
Wow.
favorite, like weird like punk. I don't want to call it a novelty record because I'm sure it's very earnest to them, but to me, it's obviously not as heartfelt when I listen to it. But there's also a song they have on a compilation. I think they're doing under a different name called "What's Shaking." That's like a Christian mid '80s kind of new wave punk record. That's like killer, like the best Screeching Weasel song Screeching Weasel never wrote.
Huh.
But
Yeah,
it's about Jesus instead of a girl.
I'm not. I don't, I'm not. I didn't dig into their catalog, but I did find one of their records. I didn't like it, but I think it was called "When You're a Rebel," and I
Is it a
bought it.
7 inch or an LP?
Oh, it was an LP,
Okay.
and I remember when they played, they covered the old reggae song "Unconditional Love," the same one that Musical Youth ended up covering years later, and they did like a punk version of it.
that's
And
odd. Was it like ska or is it like just fast punk kind of vibe?
it's hardcore. It
Oh,
didn't sound like a whole lot different than Adolescence or something, except it just wasn't as good, like nearly as good. But I think that's what they were going for. They were probably from Anaheim or somewhere. And I remember finding a video online where there's like it's like their suburban neighborhood, and all of a sudden the garage pops up and they're rocking out, and then all the kids from the neighborhood are like, "Ooh, who are these guys? What, these guys are cool!" And like,
it's so interesting because it's like a parallel universe to sort of like I guess secular punk, or there's just like there's like a Kill by Death era where there's this band that's kind of like because they go back to like early '80s. Their first single's like '81, and it's impossible to find. It's been on my want list for years. Um, but but like, and then there's like touch, like when it explodes for everything in punk in the '90s, then you have Tooth and Nail kind of running parallel to that, crossing over a little bit too.
they Canadian or
No,
Seattle?
Seattle, yeah, it's yeah, it's a world that I find very interesting. Like I grew up from it like with a huge aversion to it. Like I was much more in the dystopia camp than the MXPX camp in the '90s. So for me, it's like this exotic, weird kind of subsect of this thing that I'm really intrigued by. So, what were these shows like? Were kids moshing or were kids
Oh,
just like
I mean, this
dancing?
is like at school, and we're just like, "Oh man, really? Like, fuck this." And I think David Crosby came to our high school once and is like a sobriety anti-drug assembly. And
What was that like? That sounds incredible.
I mean, I didn't really know who he was. I knew of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but it just wasn't my thing. And my mom was all sorts of great music, but she never played them. So
But was he like I guess it's a court mandated appearance, right? That he has to do for you guys.
I'm sure he got paid. But
Or at least he's avoiding jail time by doing it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was he like what are your memories of it? Was he like earnest in it? Or was he like
Yeah, he seemed okay. I mean, he seemed compassionate about everything he was saying, but it was just like, oh God, what now are you trying to shove down our throats? And I
you
mean,
went
this
to the
whole
coolest high school in the world. You saw like one of my most sought after punk bands and you got David Crosby telling you not to do drugs.
but that school sucked because everyone hated us. I mean, like, oh, there was, I think my first or second year there, like all the jocks were gonna beat up we had a fight after school, and it was gonna be like the punks and skins, and metalheads against the jocks. And then it was I thought we were gonna die, but a bunch of our friends showed up that were like a lot older, and then they got into it with the principal, and I think they left enough of an impression on all the onlookers there, that they were just like, oh, don't fuck with these guys. But what saved me and what how I was able to finish high school was going to a alternative high school, continuation high school, because I just was getting it from everybody. The teachers hated me. I wasn't even that punk rock looking, but like I knew enough, and they didn't like me and I didn't like them. And I I was my grades were slipping, getting beat up, and I my friend's like, oh no, we go to continuation high school a few miles away, and the teachers let you smoke cigarettes, and they're really cool. And it's only like 200 people, maybe 300 people, and all freaks. And everybody was friendly, and you could tell that the teachers really loved the kids, and the kids really liked the teachers. And I don't remember any fights there. I don't remember, like, it was just chill. And
So is that more like an alternative high school like type thing?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, because
I
that's
got a proper I got a proper diploma, and I finished on time, but I think it was set in place. A lot of it was for students that were started working early, either if like or if they are actors or athletes. Like I think like maybe Greg Louganis was went to the same school, and so yeah, people that were already working or having problems like in the usual Orange County setting.
mhm.
I don't know.
My kids go to alternative schools, and I find like they work. Like they're like you're saying, the teachers are more engaged. I think because the classes generally are smaller. So, but there's like I don't know. It just feels like there's less of a focus on I don't want to say discipline, but more like just like compartmentalizing you or subjugating you. Like it's much more. It feels like much more compassionate school experience all around.
And there was no sports too, so that changed the dynamic a little, because there was no like big men on campus or jocks or this that, and it just seemed like everybody liked each other. I mean, so, but if I'd kept going to the same school, like who knows what if I don't think I would have finished, and it was just a defeating experience.
So was like because I guess it's always kind of hyped up that punk and hardcore got to Orange County and then it exploded and it was just like every kid's into it type thing. But it seems like it was still kind of like a minority in the high school.
Oh yeah, and just even being a skater was a minority back then. Even though like skating was huge, and especially down there was like, all these amazing skate parks like Upland, Pipeline, Del Mar, and all half the companies were all around Southern California, and there was always like demos and contests, and it was huge. And that's kind of how I stumbled upon punk rock. It was like going to these parks and seeing Agent Orange on the Skate Visions video, and but still, like, people hated skaters back then. And now it's just totally normal. I mean, now it's normal for people to have blue hair and not even be involved in punk or whatever. But like, I don't know.
Yeah, my friend's kid describes themselves as an aesthetic goth, where they don't listen to goth music, but the aesthetic is goth. And yeah, I guess it's like complete free interplay now between sign and signifier with kids because you don't have to choose, I guess, anymore. Like the music stuff isn't as it doesn't seem like people's identity is as tied to music as it was when I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know back then, because like I remember we stayed with my mom's friends before we moved to our house in Orange County. We couldn't move when we moved, like right in. We moved there, and we stayed with my friend's mom, and her son was goth, and like I stayed in his room. And it was all like Bauhaus, Joy Division, and great posters. But then he had a Crust poster, And I remember it was the Your Country Needs You. So that was on his page too, or on his radar. And then I remember my dad coming into his room and like already appalled by everything. But when he saw that with the hand and the, Your Country Needs You, he's just like, that's wrong. He's like a Korean War veteran. And I didn't even know that was a band, but I was like, ooh. And then when I saw that poster years later and I found out it was a band, it's like, I need that record. And I'm hanging that poster in my bedroom. But it still seemed like, I don't know, everything was still small enough that like it was cross pollinating with a bunch of different kids or into different things or identities. And just like, I was buying my first punk records from a guy that went new romantic.
Yeah, because there's like I think, well, you talked about it with Cantankerous at a certain point. Like, I think that's the thing with punk and hardcore is there's a few people that are into it in the first place, but there's also this sort of constant turnover with a lot of these people that are like there for a little bit and then they're like, oh, I'm out. Like, this isn't my thing. Versus people that are there 20, 30 years later, 40 years later.
And some people walk away for different reasons. They're like, oh, if I'm not punk, I might have a better chance of meeting girls or this or that. So,
Yeah, or and I guess like especially in LA at that time, I think we've been talked about it last time. Is the violence thing is a real factor for some people. Like, why would you want to go to a show if you're going to get the shit kicked out of you,
mm.
non-consensually? I mean, there's a lot of people that enjoy getting the shit kicked out of them at a show, and that's part of the fun of going to shows. But
Yeah,
uh,
that's what a lot of people. What everything I've read about what killed the first wave of punk was like all the hardcore kids that that were originally jocks and then discovered hardcore and like it's like, oh, we can go there and beat people up.
and
But
it's
yeah, I
and
still like
it's
those
go,
bands
go
too.
on. I'm sorry, I cut you off there. What did you say? Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying I still like those bands too, most of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing that historical distance gives me is I'm allowed to like all of it. I'm allowed to be like, oh, this thing that was probably very terrifying to experience is a record that can now just exist side by side in my record collection beside the Village People's punk record.
That's great too. Well, actually, the best song is the last song on the record, the Food Fight
Food
song.
Fight, yes. Like an LP of Food Fight would be an all-time classic record.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they just ripped off the Dickies, but
It sounds like the best Dickies song that the Dickies never wrote. Like that's the thing with that Altar Boys track on that compilation. The rest of the stuff on that compilation, I remember being like, "Yeah, whatever." But that one track by the Altar Boys carries that whole record for me.
Nail Comp, or was it a different like?
It's like a what's shaking. I think it was by oh now I'm blanking on it. There's like a Christian main sort of label that did a lot of those records back then. I've noticed.
Hmm.
Um, not Tooth and Nail. This is obviously way before Tooth and Nail, but I have like No Surrenders, like a Christian sort of hard rock metal band from back then too.
Uh,
Uh, I have another one, Forever Now, which is like a Christian kind of post youth crew band.
Weird.
Yeah.
That's a Stanley Clark record or something.
Yes, exactly.
Or no, Chicoria Return to Forever. That's
Yes,
what.
Chicory. Cantankerous, you guys just did that one tour out to Utah, right? Salt Lake City?
Yep. And we recorded a 7-inch before then, and then when we came back, myself and the bass player left, and they did another 7-inch with it was a split with Confrontation, which was Todd from Dystopia's first band, and Matt Fisher from Mindrot's first band.
Yeah. And
And
that's an impossible record to find too. That second, the split is like a
oh, really?
yeah. It's like it's I don't know. I guess they're self-released, right? Both of them.
Yeah, the drummer and our friend, a drummer of Cantankerous, and a good friend of ours did a label called Leverage and put
Yeah,
those up. Uh,
yeah. It's interesting how you guys were all kind of hanging around together, or like not together necessarily, but like it's still like it's like Dystopia is almost like an outgrowth of this sort of like community that had gone back to like the late '80s.
Yeah, I mean, we're all fans of each other's bands, and then bands like come and go, and then you start new ones with friends.
Yeah.
That was that was my big thing with joining Mindrot was I loved Confrontation and Apocalypse, and two of the guys were in those bands previously, so it was a big deal for me to join that band.
It feels like that though with like the Wild Rags thing and the obviously the Relapse thing later on. Like it's sort of like a much more metal leaning side of the underground community versus like what you were saying you were kind of drawn to in Berkeley at that or
Mhm.
what was going on in the Bay at that time.
Well, it's exactly with Mindrot in particular, because we started out as like a crust band with kind of peace punk lyrics, and like when I met all those guys, like we were involved with like the OC peace punk scene a bit, going to these picnics, occasionally protests. And I remember Chumbawamba came out to the California the first time, and like me and three of the guys from the band like went to every show. We saw him like two or three times in LA and drove up to Berkeley to see him. And then eventually, like the sound shifted, and there was I don't know, there's a lot of the stuff that we were listening to in England and stuff that was starting to change. Like Paradise Lost changed their sound, My Dying Bride, and all these bands, and a lot of those guys were kind of gravitating towards that. And I was still like into Nausea or like more crust or peace punk. And
Like is who are the bands that Mind Rot would be because you're kind of playing with punk and hardcore bands in Mind Rot though, right? Like it's not like necessarily like you guys are playing with the metal stuff. I guess there isn't really a scene yet at that point to play
I
with.
mean, well, there was a pretty cool scene, but it wasn't that big. But there was a lot of peace punk bands, Media Children, Confrontation, Apocalypse, Glissamax, who are amazing, A Solution. Uh, but then I don't know. We were lucky because we got a lot of good gigs all at once. So we got to open up for like Born Against and Rorschach. We opened up for Bolt Thrower the first time they came through, and a lot of earache bands and stuff. And I think kind of one of the things that changed some stuff with a couple of the guys in the band was like all of the earache stuff and Peaceville stuff was blowing up at once. This is like when they did these big Grind Crusher tours. It was like Napalm Death, Carcass, Brutal Truth. I don't remember all of them. And all those bands were blowing up at once, and we'd hear like stories of like, oh, they got a big record deal, or like, and I think a couple of the guys were really gung-ho about that. And then we we hooked up with these guys from Fear Factory, who we became good friends with, and they're kind of in a similar boat. Like they were when they started, I think they only played a couple shows, but they got signed pretty much like right out the gate with like Roadrunner, and they recorded their first record with a big producer, and but they were like really cool guys. They'd play like benefit shows or this or that. They were down to just do whatever when they started, and they were really good to us. And but I think that was also kind of an influence for a couple of the guys to be like, oh, we can do this, and like we can instead of touring in a van, like we might be able to tour in a bus or like. And I was like,
Yeah, because I guess that's the point where dystopia is kind of right before dystopia forms, right? Like there's
well, we
relapse.
we were together, I think, for at least 2 years before I left Mindrot. And Dan from Mindrot was our singer originally, and then he quit only, I think, like 8 or 10 shows. I think he just wanted to focus on Mindrot. Didn't want to mess with it. I don't know. But at the time I was thinking like, oh, this can be my crust band. I don't want to quit these guys because they're my friends, and I still love jamming with them and the music. And so I figured this would just be my side thing that I can play Crust and still scream about fucked up shit.
Did you find like, because I guess like the version of Crust that exists kind of in, I guess, the Bay Area is so different, and I guess Southern California too, is so different than sort of like what's classified as being the crusty scene in, say, Montreal. Or I don't mean necessarily musically, but I mean like in terms of like the audience in some cases, or the shows. Like, like last time we talked about the Toronto show where there was like the big fight between the Buffalo hardcore kids and the Toronto crusty kids. Like it feels like there was like you guys must have attracted a fairly gnarly audience in certain places.
Well, we did later, but I mean, when we were first starting, it was really more connected with the peace punk side of things, or like Crust wasn't even known as Crust, is kind of stenchcore, I think, and I think that term might have been coined by Hellbastard, or I'm not sure. But
Well, there was a
Crust,
stenchcore fanzine, but that might have been later too.
mhm. I'm not familiar with it, but sounds
Yeah,
about right.
yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. And even in the Bay Area, like it didn't seem like it seemed like everyone hated Crust till about 94 or 95. Because I remember when Nausea toured the West Coast with our friends Glycimax, and they played Gilman. I remember hearing stories of like people poo-pooing Glycimax because they had a double bass drum kit or something. They thought it was like too metal, even though like I mean they're an amazing band, like their lyrics are fucking amazing. But at the time, I think people were like, "Oh, that's metal," and they kind of like Nausea, but they were still like, "Ah, it's pretty metal."
yeah. The kick drum pedal thing, the double kick drum, was like a real dividing line, I think, between punk and what was classified as punk and what was classified, I guess, as like the metal side of hardcore in the
Mm-hmm.
'90s.
Mm-hmm.
My friend's band, this would have been later, but did a shirt which was just like a double kick drum pedal with the no sign across it.
I I don't know with the Montreal scene. I also remember that PCP was really big up there,
Yeah.
so that could have changed some perspective with like people's motivations, or I don't know. I remember when we went to that Spider Fest, and a lot of kids were on PCP. I mean, there was like all sorts of stuff there. But the buddy that I was with snorted a line, and there was like right next to a piercing tent. This woman's getting her tongue pierced, and my friend does a line of this PCP and sees this woman's tongue gets pierced and her face just like expands, and all of a sudden his eyes roll back in his head and he starts having a seizure. And we're trying to like me and my other friend are trying to help him out, and we'd never seen anything like this. And then all of a sudden there's like this naked skinhead guy. He's wearing BVDs, but like he's wearing tidy whities. And he's this huge naked skinhead that came out of nowhere and trying to help our friend. And we're like, go away, man. Like our friend's having a seizure. He's on PCP. And he's like, no, I'm on PCP too. I can help him. Uh, so yeah, it was a different animal up there. But
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends from that scene. There's a lot of good people, and I do think that like people's like convictions and motivations are, for the most part, in the right place, or at least without people that were like doing bands and stuff. But I know there was like that. The other thing that you guys have that never made it down here were the squeegee punks,
Yeah. That was like
and
a big part of the scene at that point too.
and I remember always seeing that whenever we went up there, but just people never did that down here.
Yeah, like it was a big, especially in that era. Like that was a huge part of, I guess, the punk scene in certainly Toronto, Montreal, I guess as well. But and like you said, PCP was a big part of Montreal. Like there was a Drop Dead show where I think like five kids died from bad PCP. going through, or OD. Maybe it's like three kids died, but like five people OD'd or something like that. Like it was like a real, no judgment on people on what they choose to do, but like I think it's a problem obviously when people are ODing on it, and it's certainly and it but I think it's like PCP is also right. It's angel dust, and the bikers are sort of the main thing in Canada
Mhm.
in terms of
Yeah, that's
like
what I was under the impression where a lot of it came from. And I
yeah.
remember the documentary called Squeegee Punks in Traffic.
Oh, I don't remember that. I got to see this thing.
It's probably on YouTube.
Is it from Montreal or Toronto?
It's one or the other for sure.
Oh, that's okay. I definitely got to watch this thing. But yeah, there was like, well, I guess it played out of that dystopia show, but there was like sort of like real animosity um, when certain parts of the punk scene were brought together back then. And I imagine it probably still happens now. It seems like it happens less so now, or less I hear about it less now when these sort of like cross pollinations of audiences would happen, and you'd have sort of conflicts, as you know illustrated by that Toronto Dystopia show, or anytime you'd have a metal band playing with a punk band, there was always the possibility of that kicking off, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like when I started going to shows, like it was straight edge, crusty peace punks, metalheads, just all going, and there would only be like 200 people there, and it
Yeah.
was cool. There's a gig, but then I think when things got bigger, it just got more separated.
Yeah, I guess it's when things get bigger. That's when the problems start, right? Because then people can start being there's enough people so they can people can start being elitist.
Well, and then everyone's critiquing their own little microcosm of straight edge, crust, punk, what have you.
Yeah, but it feels like also back then you go to the record store, you'd only have X amount of dollars, so you'd be like, okay, I'm going to stick with this sound that I know I like rather than take a chance on this record. I remember being so bummed on those chances, those records you take a chance on, and then you get it home, and be like, oh my god, this was like so much money. I'm stuck with this thing now.
Yep, yep. And you try to like it for like a week or so because you bought it and that's the only new thing you have. And then you're like, oh man, this sucks.
Yeah, like now it's like you don't have to pay $35 to hear some black metal band for the first. You can just go on and hear it in the same way you could hear Gizem. You don't have to pay $200 to get Detestation now. You can just listen to it on the same on YouTube for free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then decide where you what you want to spend your money on.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why like we talked about this a little bit last time, but I think that's why dystopia has been discovered by so many more people now, is because that barrier of entry is gone, and so all that's left is just the artwork.
Yeah, lyrics especially. I
Well,
think
I mean, like when I say the artwork, I mean like the music, the lyrics,
presentation. Yeah.
everything. Yeah, like there's no more like you don't have to find out about a show. You don't have to be able to find a record store that's carrying the record. There's none of that sort of like like the sort of stuff that would have kept people away from the band at one time.
Yeah, another thing that I remembered after we spoke last, there was a huge fest that we played with a bunch of other bands in Eugene, Oregon called Resist and Exist. And it was supposed to be just at a coffee shop, and we'd played at this coffee shop like a year earlier, and they weren't expecting a lot of people, but it was like 2,000 kids showed up, and they had to move it under a bridge because they couldn't fit in the coffee place. And it's like the punks and crusties and everyone just took over this whole town. You could there's great video footage on YouTube of like the local news stations like, oh, these punk rockers are in town and they're squatting in these vacant houses and they're shoplifting beer from the supermarket. And
Who all played? You guys and who else?
our friends Divisia, I think Brother Inferior from Oklahoma,
Yeah.
maybe Word Salad, or I'm trying to think. It was like a lot of bands from Arizona, New Mexico. Um, yeah, I'm blanking, but it was amazing.
Would you
It,
guys ever want to do a reunion and play again?
I mean, I would love to, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. It's just, I don't know. It was so much easier back then, and that's a complicated question with
Yeah.
everybody.
But there's always that temptation, I guess, right? Like where, maybe not for everyone in the band, I guess.
Yeah, I would have to get back to you on how to present that answer. I have to think about it.
And like once again, if it's too personal, but like why did you guys stop playing?
I mean, in my brain, a lot of it was Todd not moving up here and join another band, and I don't know. I feel like we ran our course in a weird way, like musically, songwriting, and it took us like 5 years to finish our last record, and there really was no reason why, but I don't know. We were really wanted to just be an underground band that were playing DIY shows, and then eventually some of these clubs they were like too many people showing up, and like we played a show at the Smell in LA, and it was totally oversold and it got fucked up. People bum rushed the door, broke the door down, and it's like other people are like, oh well, you're too big for that place now. You should be playing this club or this club or this club. Or we're like, well, but this is what we want to do. This is where we come from. And so there was that part of it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think we were really setting out to be popular or this or that. We just wanted to play and tour and have fun, and we were always so accustomed to people not knowing what to make of us, or even they couldn't decide if they liked us. It seemed like it's like, even when we played Toronto and Montreal, like there'd be a few people like, yeah, this is amazing, and then there'd be a lot of people just with their arms crossed. It's like, am I can't figure these guys out. Like I don't know what to compare them to, or like, and I like they don't dress like us, or like, and so we were always just used to that, and we were comfortable with that. That's just how we rolled, and we always managed to make friends with all these other bands that we had nothing in common with, just out of being weird or just being friendly, maybe. I don't know.
I can't believe I forgot to bring up that Smell show because that is one of the most storied shows on this podcast. Like that thing comes up,
Really?
and anytime someone from LA, in particular, that sort of smell scene comes on this podcast, that show comes up. Like it is a show that is legendary. There's no other way to describe it.
That's where we want to play if we can play. But it just, then everybody showed up and fucked it up, and pissed off all our friends that were doing the door and volunteering. And and we didn't want them to be mad at us, but
I
it's
think
like,
it led to a ban on hardcore shows there for or at least a perceived ban by certain parts of like the punk scene that there was a ban on hardcore shows there afterwards. And I think it also probably led to that. Once again, I'm not part of this scene, so this is just what I've kind of interpreted. But I think it led to that smell scene going the way it went, where like there weren't many punk and hardcore bands, like straight up punk and hardcore bands playing. So sort of the scene became a lot more artier. What was left was more the artier thing, and that.
and we love that stuff too.
Oh, absolutely, me too. So I'm not.
I think we were like, I'm pretty sure we booked Amps for Christ and I can't remember if it was Gasp or Tarantula Hawk, but we were always trying to, like, if we had a choice in like curating the gig, we were always trying to pull from different genres of music and making it interesting. And
Yeah,
sometimes people liked it and sometimes people didn't.
my my first show at the Gilman, I think it was my first show there. seeing it was also seeing Capitalist Casualties play, but it was with At the Drive-In. And I feel like weirdly Dystopia and At the Drive-In are bands that I see as being somewhat similar in the sense that neither one of you guys really fit in with anyone at that time, like any label other than your own labels. I mean, but like any scene, like there was just like a hard band, like you're saying, like people would stand there with their arms folded because people didn't really know what to make of it at the time. And I feel like it's weirdly like At the Drive-In in that way, and where like the only option for you guys like was to become a huge band. Like because like you're not going to just blend into a scene. Like you're clearly attracting a fan base and it's kind of like building at that point. So yeah, like I like what do you want to do? What are you going to do if you're an underground band and you don't want to become not an underground band?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a ton of bands since then, and none of them ever got as big, and I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
It's easier. Don't have to answer to a club about things getting fucked up or this or that, and I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm doing it for other reasons, and some people do traditionally want to play music. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think that's why like I describe it as like art with dystopia because it does feel like th four people, I guess originally, but three people coming together to make this cohesive thing that ran its course, came to an end, and it's kind of just like left as this vision that was out
Yeah, I mean, we never stopped playing music, so
there.
still trying to do other things, and we're not trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, and you
So,
guys are all still, I don't know, like friendly, right? Like I don't
oh
like
yeah,
no,
no,
you guys.
I don't talk to Todd as much, but I talk to Dino like every other week, and a lot of it's with the phone, and sometimes it goes late into the night, and my wife's just like, "You need to go to bed," just like stop, and we're just like da 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 da.
Just do a podcast, and then it becomes like a. You're like, oh, we're just doing a podcast. Why do you think I do this? Every time my wife gets mad at me, I'm like, I'm doing the podcast. I have to talk on the phone all night.
Yeah.
Where was the gnarliest place you guys ever stayed? I can imagine you guys got put up in some wild places.
I can't think of anything that was like really gnarly and unbearable, but going to Europe and staying in a lot of the squats there in places just blew us away. Like those things even existed, and they had like, like going to the Kopi. Have you been there?
Was that the one in Copenhagen or no?
Berlin, Kopi. It's like a old building right at the edge of Berlin,
Did it
and
get
it's
torn
like
down, or is that the one that got
no,
torn
it's
down?
still going.
Okay,
It's
no, we stayed at one that got torn down a few years ago.
I mean, there's just so many spots in Europe that are like
Yeah,
old buildings and old communities, and it's not just punk. And they've got this great like system and network going where they feed the bands, and there's like sleeping rooms and this and that, and it's all DIY, and it's like going to places like that was really inspiring, seeing that like these things can exist, because they definitely didn't exist at the time we started in the US, and especially in Orange County. I mean, it's like you try to squat a house or a building, and then the police are just show up with guns, and that's it.
it's interesting how that sort of Bay Area like Gilman model becomes the thing that gets exported a little bit. Like everyone, not everyone, but there's a lot of places that wanted to do a Gilman style venue. There's obviously Food Not Bombs chapters that pop up everywhere. Like it's that interpretation of punk versus sort of this Orange County, well, on any number of the Orange County scenes other than the peace punk scene, I guess, that could have been exported or, any other sort of punk offshoot. Like it's interesting that it's sort of this very political DIY Bay Area version. But I guess that's the most empowering for a kid to kind of discover.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure like how much inspiration for that came. Also, might have come from Europe. I haven't really read anything about it, but like places like that it existed from the 60s and the 70s, like in Copenhagen at Ungdomshuset and Christiania, and a lot of kind of radical communities happen in Amsterdam. So I don't know. I'm not.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously like where Tim Yohannan and Jeff Bale are kind of getting a lot of the inspiration from, and I think the fact that the major media source at that time is Maximum Rock and Roll probably aided in that sort of dissemination of ideology.
I mean, I don't know if those guys ever traveled in Europe, but I think a lot of the stuff that they were exposed to was all from the 60s and the 70s in the Bay Area, from what I've read.
Yeah, like very, very well. Like I say this as someone who like learned so much from it, but like a very radical perspective to kind of discover as a young kid, and things like book your own fucking life, like sort of these things that just became essential
Yeah,
for
that
punk
was our
rock.
message board before the computers.
Yeah,
How I was able to find places in like, Winnipeg or whenever we were traveling through, and a lot of bands booked their tours with that.
I
And
think
before
every
it was,
band, right? Like, like it feels like that was like every single band, was like, well, I guess if we're going on tour, we got to buy this book your own fucking life first thing.
yeah, I always read stuff like it was like DOA and Black Flag were the guys that had like all the addresses and like the first hardcore bands to travel the US. And then a lot of the Bay Area bands did it. And like for a while, our friend Kamala was the one like that had all the intel and just like, oh, you want to play there? Hit up Kamala. Like she's got a phone book. She probably has a number. And then eventually it was Book Your Own Life, and I think they did like 4 or 5 like episode or
Issues, yeah.
issues, like, and
Every couple years, you'd see it on the back cover of MRR, like, book your own fucking life, coming soon. Please send in submissions.
yeah, no, I mean that made punk rock work for a long time.
Yeah, and it was like so. I find the thing that's so beautiful about it is it's just organically sustained in a way. Like it's no one's doing it for any sort of like greater economic. Maybe the people that are running the really successful labels are doing it for some sort of greater economic gain. But I think most of these kids, they're just doing it because they love it, and that's what kept it going. It had
And you didn't know what you're going to get either. Like I put a couple ads in there, and like I'd get crank call like 2 in the morning at my parents' house, or just like, I'm sure there was plenty of book your own life gone wrong stories out there, but I have, other than a couple crank calls, that was.
it definitely also had to be self-policed in that way too, where it was like, oh, this guy's a sketch bar. Like, do not deal with this record label. Do not
But
deal with
the only
this.
way that it existed was like writing a letter to Maximum Rock and Roll,
The
which would
letter
take,
section.
yeah.
The letter section was like the TMZ message board. Like that was the hottest part of that magazine.
Yeah, No Effects had a song called "I'm Telling Tim."
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been amazing. And anytime you want to come back on here, Matt, you are always welcome on this podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me on here and letting me talk my trash.